Welcome back to Introduction to Programming. This is John Duane and you're watching Video 3 in this series. In the past two videos I spoke about the different objects and data and output that are involved with all programs. This is all a little abstract, so I thought this time we'd spend more time on the examples, and so the whole idea of the objects in Excel would be much more clear. So what we're going to do in this video is talk about actually creating a program, what's really involved, and I think you'll get a better idea of how we go about this. So that's what we're going to do today. So creating a program in Excel, an Excel macro, there's two ways to do it. You can use the macro recorder, or you could write the whole thing from scratch. And actually there's a third way to do it, which is probably even more common, which is it's a combination of the two. The code that is required to manipulate objects in Excel can be fairly complicated, and has to be done exactly right. So the macro recorder is a really good way to get the syntax for certain functions exactly right. One of the problems with it, though, is it can't create a dynamic program. Our example today will demonstrate that, and it'll show you the good and the bad with the macro recorder. Now in the code editor, if you know the exact syntax for how to write a function or a process, then you can do everything right there. The macro recorder, though, can speed things up, and you'll kind of see what I mean when we go through our example today. Now in the code editor, the code can be organized into one or many modules, and you'll see a little bit of that, especially in the next slide. So here we've got sort of a general outline of the elements of a program in Visual Basic for applications. The programs can be made up of several things, but they almost all have procedures, sort of step-by-step instructions about what to do. In today's example, we're going to be looking at general procedures, but there's also a type of procedure called event handling, which we'll get to in a future video. We could also write functions, custom functions. In Excel, and in all the Microsoft Office applications, there are built-in functions already there for you. For instance, if you wanted to add up a column of numbers, there's the sum function. Well, let's say you wanted to create a function that did something a little different that's not exactly in the Excel library. You could make a custom function using VBA. And then finally, there's this thing called classes, which are definitions of custom objects, and this is where you could create your own object, such as workbook, worksheet, cell, row, but you could create it in a very special way so that it's specific to your particular circumstance. We won't be doing any of that right away, but in a future video we'll get to classes. So the program code goes into what I call containers. The container that we've seen so far is the module. So general purpose code would go there. We'll see another example of that today. Class modules, we'll talk about those in future videos. I showed you how to make a form in the last video. We didn't actually make the form, but I showed you kind of where you would do that. There's actually VBA code that you would write that would sit behind the form. So there's another container. Workbooks and worksheets, they all have code related to them. So these are all in different containers. And when I refer to the good housekeeping principles of programming, one of them is to be neat and tidy. Be very logical about where you put your code so that it's easy for another person to follow. And by using all of these containers in the right way, that'll make it very simple for someone unfamiliar with your program to follow what you've done. So let's do some of this. Here's an Excel worksheet, and what I'm going to do is show you how to add up a row of columns. I've got two tabs, one called the Recorder tab and one called Dynamic tab. Both have the same numbers. We're going to create in cell A9 a function to sum up the column. And first we're going to do it with the macro recorder. So we'll see the code that gets created when we do that. So in order to get the macro recorder to begin recording our keystrokes, we're on the Developer tab, and then over in this left-hand section there's an icon for Record Macro. So we'll click that. It'll ask us what name we want to give it, and I think Macro 1 is a good name. I think that's all we need to do there. And from now on, any keystroke or mouse click is going to be recorded by the macro recorder. So what I want to do is I want to create a sum formula in A9, cell A9, that'll add up that column. So the way I would do it is I highlight the whole row, and I find the summation symbol, click it, and there is my formula right there, 482. Sum, and in parentheses, A1 colon A8. All right, that's terrific. So now we'll go back to the Developer tab and hit Stop Recording, and the macro recorder is done. So let's take a look at what it actually created for us. So here we are in the interactive development environment. In the modules section, we have a module. Now I didn't insert that module, but it was done by the macro recorder. And here's macro 1, and this is the code that it created. So let's take a look at this. In order to move the cursor on a worksheet, we need to tell the cursor where to go. So we need to tell it to go to a cell location. The lingo that we use in VBA to indicate a cell location is range. So range could be a group of cells or it could be a single cell. So here the first thing I did was I colored in that entire, I guess what was it, 9 cells, and so range A1 through A9 was selected. So selected means it was colored in, and then I picked it. Then I went up and I hit the summation function icon on the toolbar, and what was done to record that action was range A9 was activated, and then it created this formula. So active cell, so that's where the cursor is right now, active cell, and then after this period it's saying for the active cell the formula in row column format equals sum R minus 8 C colon R minus 1C. This may not look very user-friendly at first, but you'll see what it does create. And then here range A9 select. So again, it's putting the cursor back in cell A9. So let's go to the worksheet again, and we'll delete the formula. And now let's run that code and see what happens. So over here on macros, we click that, and there's macro 1. So we'll hit the run button, and boom, there it is, 482. And the summation formula is in the format that we're accustomed to uh, the columns in letters and the rows in numbers. All right. Now, one of the things I said before is that these recorded macros are not dynamic. So what would happen if I took all of these numbers and I made the column a little longer? Well, what would happen here? Okay, so now I've got 18 numbers. Well, let's go back to macros. Actually, you know what? Let's cancel that. Let's change a few of these so that we'll make the example a little easier. So a lot of 7s. So let's run our macro, and oh look, we have our nice summation formula A1 to A8, but it's here. I actually wanted it down here, but the macro is not very flexible in that regard. So we end up with the formula being wherever the original recording placed it. It's not smart enough to know that the column is now longer. So there isn't any dynamic capabilities here. All right, so what we've picked up from this then is that the macro recorder is quite good at coming up with the VBA code we need. Oh, come back here. It comes up with the VBA code that we need. Sorry for all that flashing around there. But it's not very dynamic. In the next video, we'll talk about a macro written without the recorder that is much more dynamic. So stay tuned for video 4. Thank you.